Are you ready for some Jersey? Well, we've got Jersey. The zipper was made here. The light bulb was made here. The color television calls the Garden State home. Everybody wants to know about New Jersey. Sandy beaches, beautiful cities. We even have the Jersey Turnpike. Inventors, music, the movies. You need an exit? We got them too. You want Jersey? This is Jersey.
Welcome to this edition of This is Jersey. Today, we're across the Hudson on the west side of New York City, experiencing some amazing military and maritime history at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. The Intrepid has a decorated history of naval service and was decommissioned for the final time in 1974. Years later, it was permanently anchored in New York City, and the museum was opened in 1982. In addition to the aircraft carrier itself, the museum also displays a wide variety of naval memorabilia, large and small aircraft, submarines, and even the Space Shuttle Enterprise. Over 1 million visitors a year pass through the renovated interior of the Intrepid and take in the many exhibits they have on display, from the kid-friendly Explorium to the spectacular and sunny flight deck. Eric Boehm is a former Air Force sergeant and the curator of aviation at the museum for almost 15 years, and he's here with us now to tell us a little bit more about the aircraft on board and how they came to be here.
Oh, it's a dream come true. I spent 20 years in the military myself in the Air Force, and my dad was a Navy man, and this is kind of a great blend to come here to the Intrepid, work on old Navy airplanes, and including an airplane like that Avenger over there that my dad flew on when he was in the Navy.
So now you started here repairing and restoring, and now you're a curator. Tell me, what are some of the things you need to do to restore an aircraft?
Well, that's just it. You got to remember that these are airplanes, but they're no longer flyable. These are now museum pieces. They have a whole different parameters to be treated here. We're an outdoor collection. We got 27 airplanes, and most of them are outside. So we got to kind of treat them as sculpture that has to withstand the elements. And the elements here in New York City are pretty rough.
So where do they come from? Where do they arrive?
Well, most of our collection is on loan from either the Air Force or the Navy Museum or the Marine Corps Museum down in Quantico. But we do own some of them, and I actually have an airplane on display that I bought on eBay.
Oh, really?
Yes. It was a Soviet design that faced Intrepid aircraft during the Vietnam War. And it was just a really neat part of the collection to put with our Vietnam era airplanes to show kind of like a friend and foe. It was cheap. We went for it.
Great. So tell me about some of the other pieces you had upstairs and what was required to get them to where they look today.
Well, one of the really cool pieces we have upstairs, of course, is the Space Shuttle Enterprise. And that was a real trick getting that, because they were retiring the shuttle fleet. We all knew that when the shuttle fleet retired that Discovery was probably going to go to the Smithsonian, but they already had the Enterprise. And the Endeavour and the Atlantis, where would they go? Everybody threw their hat in the ring. And we were lucky enough to get Enterprise. So when Discovery went to the Smithsonian, Enterprise was kind of surplus by then, and it came here. And we just love having Enterprise because telling that space story. We have a space story at Intrepid already with Mercury and Gemini missions, the recovery of. Okay. But we don't have any Apollo history. And when Apollo was going on, Intrepid was busy with the Vietnam War. But having that shuttle here brings more people in to teach about the space.
Now, how did you get it here? That's the big question.
Oh, getting it here was a real trick. But they flew it in on top of the 747. And they landed out at JFK, and as you know, JFK is right alongside the water. And so just like our Concorde that we have, it was loaded onto a barge and floated all the way around and up the Hudson River, and then another large crane came and put it on the deck.
Great.
And then we built the building around it.
So I know you have many other planes upstairs. You had how many, 27 in total?
27 all.
Tell me about some of them.
Well, some of the ones I really enjoy having, things like the F-8 Crusader that we have upstairs. That one, F-8 Crusader flying with VF-111 on Intrepid in 1968. Shot down a MiG-21. We have a MiG-21. It was actually a gift from the Polish government, but I asked them for permission to paint the MiG up like a North Vietnamese MiG to put it alongside the F-8. But also up there is a Sky Raider. Go look at that one. That's a beautiful airplane. The Sky Raider was a very important airplane to Intrepid's history because they served on Intrepid all through the 1960s and into the 70s even. So having one of those was a real coup. Now where that one came from was the U.S. Marine Corps. And they said, hey, we got it. It's a basket case. It's got a lot of damage, but we now have the capabilities. I have a great crew and I have a great facility up there that we can restore our airplanes. And so it's most recently restored and rolled out on the line. And it's actually one of the prototype Skyraiders, so it was built in 1945. So it makes it almost one of the oldest airplanes in the collection too.
One that has a big circle around the wings. Tell me about that one.
Oh, you might be talking about the Tracer with the big radome up
the
top.
radome, yeah.
Can you imagine you're on the ship, you're the commander, and you have all these radar dishes on the ship, but those only see out to the horizon. They don't see over the horizon. Now take those same radar dishes, put them in an airplane, now take that airplane and fly it 200 miles away, and now you have eyes over the horizon. And so the crew on that can radio that data back to the commander. So it extends kind of the eyes of the fleet a little further away. It's a very essential airplane, and there's the replacement. The E-2 Hawkeye is still in service today.
Now you have the Huey out there too, which was...
Well, we have a Huey, yeah. The Huey, which is pretty interesting, is that Huey is one of the really oldest Hueys out there in the world right now. From what I can tell, that one is number 80. The thousands and thousands that have been built, that one was built in 1959, so it's older than me.
And its significance through the Vietnam War, it was like its signature, correct?
You know, it's the iconic image. You watch a Vietnam War movie,
Right.
I don't care what movie it is, you're going to see Hueys. Hueys were all over the place in the Vietnam. We left like 3,000 of them behind when we left there with the South Vietnamese Air Force. So yeah, the Hueys is like that's the iconic airplane of the Vietnam War.
You actually have a plane out there from Israel. Tell me about that one.
Well, back in the day, you got to go back, several decades here, and let's talk about the Israeli and the wars going on in the Mideast. And there was an arms embargo, and the Israelis had great success with a French-made Mirage 3. They asked the French for a more capable airplane that can do air-to-air and air-to-ground. The French designed this airplane. It's called the Mirage 5. But then there was an embargo, and so the Israelis weren't getting their jets. Using some corporate espionage, they were able to get that design and build it themselves, but they needed an engine. They were already building the J79 jet engine, which the Americans, that's an American jet engine from the F-4 Phantom. And we were giving them Phantoms, and they were licensed building the engines for it. So they had this great American engine technology, made it to this great French airframe, and that made the Kafir. And we have one, and if you look at that airplane, you'll notice it has the markings of not only the Israeli Air Force, but of the US Navy and the US Marine Corps, because that airplane was loaned to the Navy to be used in Top Gun training. And then the Marine Corps very briefly had their own training squadron for Top Gun type training. So it's wearing the insignia of the Israelis, the US Navy, and the US Marines all at the same time. And the A-12 was kind of the forerunner of the SR-71 Blackbird. A-12s came out first. The A-12 was a strictly CIA project. All the pilots that flew were former Air Force, but they all had to surrender their commissions to become CIA pilots. The airplane was really designed to fly really high, really fast. Remember Gary Powers, 1960, getting shot down in the U-2? Well, the CIA wanted something to fly higher and faster. Of course, the Soviets at the same time were making missiles that could go higher and faster. So the mission was almost non-existent even when the airplane finally flew. They did get to fly missions over Vietnam during the Vietnam War in 1968. And then also in 68, I credit the A-12 with kind of preventing a larger conflict, and that would be the Pueblo incident. And some of your viewers who are older like me may remember the Pueblo incident in 1968. The North Koreans rattling their saber like they're doing today. They went out and captured one of our spy ships. We were in international waters. They claimed it was their waters. They captured our ship and the crew. They used the A-12s, which were already in theater looking for SAM sites over Vietnam. Let's do some missions. And so a few missions over North Korea, it's all it took to realize we found the ship, we found buildings where the crew would be, but more importantly, the North Koreans were not mobilizing their military. We could step back and let diplomacy work its way out. And the crew was eventually released. They still have our ship. Over the years, they've always offered the ship back, and they're like, please lift the sanctions and we'll give you your ship back. And we're like, you keep it. But they still have the ship. They made a floating museum out of it for a short period of time. Ring a bell? Right. So it's still there. The USS Pueblo is still there. So you're going from World War II propeller-driven airplanes into the jet age. So not only was the airplane technology expanding, but the ship technology had expanded. The catapults had to be made stronger. They had to put an angled flight deck on there so that you can land jets on an angle and not interfere with airplanes further up the deck. A lot of things had to change both in the ship and in the airplanes, but we have many here that served on this ship, and you notice you mentioned the wings folding. We try to fold everything we can because have a lot of airplanes on this ship, and we try to have room for visitors, we got to fold the wings up. And some of them have different unique configurations. They're kind of fun to look at, different ways the wings fold, especially if you look at the Avenger over here. But I got a really cool little jet down here, the A4 Skyhawk, which was developed to meet a Navy requirement to fly from carriers, be small enough to go up and down the elevators to be stored in this area, but also be able to carry a certain amount of bombs to the target and back, and have the range and be able to do all that mission. And a very brilliant designer by the name of Ed Heineman comes along from Douglas Aircraft, and he designs an airplane where all that stuff, including a lot of the extra fuel, all the weapons would be hung externally, making the airplane kind of small and compact. And you go look at it, it's really the only aircraft from the jet era on Intrepid where the wings do not fold, because he made the jet small enough to fit the parameters without folding the wings. In fact, the Argentinians used it against the British during the Falklands War and sunk a British ship with them. So it's quite a capable airplane, and we're really happy to have that airplane here. And what makes it even better is we have like a dozen airplanes here that flew from Intrepid during its history, but they're only of the same type. That airplane was really on Intrepid in 1966. It's the only airplane in my collection that really flew combat from this ship.
Interesting. Eric, we have to take a break now. We come back, I want to talk about some of the helicopters that you've had here. We'll do that when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to This is Jersey. We're in New York City today at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, and we're talking to Curator of Aviation, Eric Boehm. The museum honors American heroes, educates the public, and inspires youth by exhibiting their historically and technologically significant collection of air, sea, and spacecraft. Both the hangar deck and flight deck are filled with pairs of wings that span a good portion of the 20th century and have been used for a wide variety of military service. After a year-and-a-half-long renovation and repairs process over a decade ago, the carrier has really opened up and taken on a new life, as well as granting access to previously inaccessible areas. But their collection remains one of the biggest attractions. Eric is here to tell us more about some of the pieces we'll find on board and how they fit into the narrative of the USS Intrepid.
Helicopters have always been integral in war. Tell me about the one that's behind us and the others that we made.
Yeah, sure, especially on aircraft carriers, because when carrier operations were going on after World War II, helicopters are always in the air. To this day, there's always a helicopter in the air if there's flight operations going on, because, you know, pilots might have plane problems either landing or taking off and end up in the water. So you want to be able to rescue. Modern age, you got these wonderful little machines. They're compact. Notice the blades fold fits inside when you got to put them inside. They fold out really fast. You can fire them up and get them launched really quick.
How long does that take?
Just minutes. Minutes. You got a good crew. They're crawling all over it. They're getting those blades extended. You're warming it up and you're flying within a few minutes. And a machine like this is one of the first rescue helicopters deployed on aircraft carriers. And one of the really cool features about it is the rescue hoist. And you can't really see it. It's inside. And it comes through a trap door in the bottom of the helicopter. And if you notice through the glass there that the co-pilot's seat is folded up out of the way. Now this inherently was a bad idea, because you got the only guy flying it winching up and probably an incapacitated pilot into the cockpit with him, and he's the only guy flying the machine. But it's a small, compact thing, not a lot of power. There's a little bit of weight and balance issues. If you look at modern helicopters today, that rescue hoist is still on the helicopter, but it's now external. It's usually hanging off the side of the helicopter. There's a huge door that will open where rescue swimmers can jump in the water to help the pilot if necessary. And this goes all the way back into the 1960s. You know, we're coming up on the Apollo 11 anniversary. Look at the film of Apollo 11 being recovered. You'll see the helicopters coming in and the divers jumping out of that big door, and then the astronauts being brought up on the winch, which is external on that big door. So there was a bit of evolution going on there. This is the granddaddy of them all, though. This is the old first one.
As we mentioned before we went on air, that you used to repair these in the Air Force. That was part of your job.
Oh yeah, I was aircraft structural maintenance for 20 years, and I had a lot of fun. Mostly worked on cargo airplanes and then some bombers over in Europe, but and a little bit of time on the stealth fighter before that was retired.
At the museum, you have some manned space material here. Tell me about that.
Well, Intrepid was called upon during the Mercury missions, which was America's first space program where a single astronaut was in the capsule. And there were 6 of those missions. But we recovered Scott Carpenter, who was the mission immediately after John Glenn. Now, he landed really long off target, and only helicopters from Intrepid were able to go retrieve him. So he was brought back to the Intrepid. His space capsule was recovered by another smaller ship. But then in 1965, the very first Gemini mission, and that's the two-man system. And Gemini was important. There was going to be 12 Gemini missions to kind of rehearse spacewalks and docking and rendezvous. All those things they would need for Apollo to go to the moon had to be rehearsed in Gemini, and that's the two-man capsules. And we recovered the very first Gemini mission with Gus Grissom and John Young. And so there's a very famous film of their capsule. They landed pretty much right on target. The ship just sidled right up to them and was able to pluck their capsule with our onboard crane. The onboard crane you could see right on the starboard side here today with a replica Gemini capsule hanging from it.
Wow. So this ties into future moon-related activities.
Right. So we do have that space. We've always had that space story. Getting the space shuttle enhanced that. But what we're really focused on as a museum, even though we talk about the history of things, we want the visitor to kind of know what might be, because that's what makes the kids really interested. If you ever watch a kid looking at what used to be, they get bored quick. But if you show them what used to be, what's going on now, and what's going on in the future. So a lot of our exhibits, a lot of our space exhibits up there, if you go up to our Space Shuttle Pavilion, you'll see our little Apollo 11 installation. A good half of it is dedicated to what's going to happen in the future, a return to the moon, going to Mars someday, and what that hardware might look like, and how it kind of looks like what we did with Apollo in the 1960s. But I think that stuff is really important to reach the kids.
You know, we have to take a break now. We come back, I want to talk about the museum in its entirety and who comes here to visit. We'll do that when we come back. Thank you so much for joining us on This is Jersey. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to This is Jersey. We're on board the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City today, and we're continuing our conversation with Curator of Aviation, Eric Mame. The Intrepid has an incredible collection of aircraft on board. Through exhibitions, educational programming, and the collection of groundbreaking aircraft and marine vessels, over 1 million visitors a year are taken on an interactive journey through the history of American military technology, innovation, and bravery. We've already learned a lot about the exhibits and aircraft, but there's much more to learn and see if anyone's interested in spending a day aboard the Intrepid. And Eric's here with us now to tell us how we can find out more about the museum and what other programs and special events they offer.
Well, everybody comes here. What's really fun to see the school groups. Kids coming in here in just big groups and being led around, and our educators get a hold of them, and the education staff here is amazing. And we also have access education, so anybody can come here. We deaf, hard of hearing, anybody who wants to. We also have veterans that come in, PTSD issues. Maybe they want to come in when we're not open, before we open. We also bring in autistic kids before we open, so there's not so many crowded areas and they can enjoy it better. But there's just so much going on here. There's so much to see. Probably spend a good 5-6 hours here. If you go to our website, intrepidmuseum.org, on Fridays, we're doing this thing called Free Fridays. We can get in for free and enjoy some of the programming here, and there's a lot of special programming going on during those Friday evenings as well. You know, a lot of things, this space we're in now, there's a sprinkler system added, so we're essentially a building according to New York City. So where the visitors go, it's all safe to be in. There's multiple exits, there's fire extinguishers, fire sprinklers, no asbestos, no lead paint, things like that. But there's lots of places on this ship where visitors just can't go. It's just too dangerous, and there's really no access because the Navy like really steep stairways too. So we don't really have a chance to go below deck. We hope in the future to be modifying some of these spaces, or maybe even doing kind of like a virtual reality visit to those spaces.
Okay. And that's because there's no access, there's no fire access, is that
well, it's not a legal access, put it that way. And not only that, it's kind of dangerous down there. There's old fuel oils, there's things you can bump your heads on. It's very difficult to climb some of these stairwells, so even I don't go down there.
And men and women lived on it for months.
Yeah, that's why I joined the Air Force.
There you go.
When you're on the ship for about a half hour, you realize why the Air Force was so much more attractive.
Now, this is more than a museum in that you have a lot of visual arts, videos.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. There's lots of videos, interactives going on up in our Space Shuttle Pavilion. We have a VR element going on with virtual reality. You can go on the space station. You can go outside the space station if you find the door handle. There's also an AR, an alternate reality element up there. which is all, it's hosted by Mae Jemison, who was the first female black astronaut. And so she does this whole story about women in space. And it's very inspirational to young people to see her. But it's an AR experience, so you're walking around our space shuttle pavilion and Mae Jemison pops up like a hologram. It's a lot of fun to do.
Wow. Let our viewers know how they can reach out to the Intrepid.
Well, I think the best way is go to our website, intrepidmuseum.org, and just start surfing in there, start looking around, look for those free Friday programs, look for those special programs if you like. Go into our education tab and find all those extra things that are going on. There's always something going on in Intrepid, always a lot of fun. And if you see anybody with these shirts on, please don't hesitate to come up to us and ask the question if you have one. And if you want to talk about airplanes, I'm your guy. I can talk all day.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for being on our show.
My pleasure.
Good luck with all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back right after this.